Welcome everyone, this is Andre's Restart, and today we are talking about how a lot of Zelda fans are missing out. Now when I say this, I'm not saying every single Zelda fan is missing out. Everyone has different preferences. But what I am getting at here is I do think there is a significant part of the Zelda fan base that perhaps should give another game series a try. So if you haven't figured it out already, this isn't just a Zelda video. This is also a Xenoblade video and a Monolith Soft video. Now a lot of Zelda fans watching this video may be like, Xenoblade, what's that? Or Xenoblade, ew, that's disgusting. Which hurts me personally because I love Xenoblade, it's one of my favorite series out there. And one of the reasons I fell in love with Xenoblade was because I was already a very big Zelda fan. And Zelda is my favorite franchise, but there are other series out there that appeal to me for different reasons, such as the Xenoblade Chronicles series. But there are also things about Xenoblade that remind me of Zelda, even though they're very different experiences. But I feel that, similar to my own personal experience with Xenoblade as a Zelda fan, I think there's a lot of Zelda fans out there that if they were to give this series a try, they might fall in love with it in a similar way that I did. So why is this the case? What is so special about Xenoblade that Zelda fans should be giving it a try? What are Zelda fans missing out on? Well, that's what we're diving further into today. But before going forward, let me point out that we are aiming to reach 50,000 subscribers, perhaps before the launch of Nintendo's next generation console. So if you do enjoy my content, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. Leaving a like is also super helpful. And enjoy the ride as we talk about Nintendo every day. So let's first talk about this issue amongst the Zelda community, because once this issue is understood, I think it'll put a lot more needed perspective on what I'm getting at here. So I would argue that whenever we get a major Zelda game, the Zelda fan base is highly critical of that game, and then years later, there's a growing appreciation for that game. It seems almost cyclical. There are some exceptions, but for the most part, this kind of feels to be the case. The Wind Waker was like this, Twilight Princess was like this, Skyward Sword was like this. Breath of the Wild might be one of those exceptions, but there is definitely a very vocal audience that are against Breath of the Wild. And arguably an even more vocal audience is speaking out against Tears of the Kingdom. And this is for a variety of reasons. Some of that I think has to do with many preferring the formula before Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. And then another I just think aren't a fan of specifically Tears of the Kingdom. It isn't so much that Breath of the Wild is the problem, but Tears of the Kingdom. And I personally do not feel this way. I love Tears of the Kingdom. I think it's a fantastic game. I do not know where it ranks amongst the Zelda games. I think it's very high up there, but I think it's going to take some time for me to fully decide where I would personally rank it, and that can change over time, as I'm sure it does for most people. But a common criticism of Tears of the Kingdom is the story and the way it's told. Now when it comes to the story of Tears of the Kingdom, there's a few different considerations here. There is the overall background lore, different details that we can find throughout the game that help to link this game alongside the other Zelda games along the timeline. And so there's a lot of debate there, and a lot of people feel that there's not much to that, especially based off a lot of interviews. But then there's the other element of simply how the current story is told. What happens with Zelda in the past, what happens with Link in the current time, the lack of depth of certain characters. But then others have issues with some inconsistencies with the characters in the world. Not a lot of people are fans that not everyone recognizes Link from the prior game. And I don't want to really dwell on the counter arguments against these things. I've spoken out against these things in the past. I'm not saying that you are wrong for feeling this way. I'm simply saying there are different opinions on this. But the main point to be made here is that there is a big part of the Zelda fan base that feels a certain type of way about the story elements in Tears of the Kingdom. I think they're making big strides in the story department for Tears of the Kingdom, and I think with the next game it'll be even better, while also still retaining that open-air formula and being its own thing. But that Zelda game is likely years away, and even when that game does come, I'm sure there will still be a vocal part of the community that won't be a fan of that. It may be a different part of the community, but there will still be negative feedback because that is the way it works for every Zelda game, no matter how good it is. That's how opinions work. But because there is such a vocal part of the community that is so upset by the story, I find it quite interesting when you consider the sales of Tears of the Kingdom and even the sales of Breath of the Wild, that the Xenoblade series pales by comparison in such a large way. The Xenoblade games sell 1 to 3 million copies. It's just a significant difference. Tears of the Kingdom has likely sold well over 20 million. I'm sure we're getting an update very soon on that, with the Q3 earnings release about to come out. But even Breath of the Wild is well over 30 million. And so there's just such a big difference between the sales of Zelda games and Xenoblade games. Now, they're very different games, and I definitely understand that Xenoblade is considered to be more niche. But I do think more people need to give Xenoblade a try, and too many people are afraid to give it a try. And there are reasons for that. But my ultimate point here, and I actually tweeted about this a few days ago, I knew it was going to be a bit of a hot take, and it caught a little bit of attention, and people shared their opinions, and they're all totally justified. Everyone has their own perspective. But what I find so special about Xenoblade, and how I think a lot of Zelda fans would fall in love with it if they were to give it a try, is that Xenoblade, the entire series, is comprised of large, massive, fantastical worlds. Adventure is a big element to these games. It is why I love the Zelda games. Zelda is about adventure, and with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, they really honed in on that part to the series. That's one of the reasons why I hold them to such high esteem, because adventure to me is one of the most important elements to a game. I love exploring exotic, fantastical, large worlds. And that's something that Xenoblade specializes in. So if that's something that you enjoy about the Zelda games, I think that's something you would enjoy about the Xenoblade games as well. But what's also interesting here, when we take into consideration a lot of the negative feedback that fans have been providing for Tears of the Kingdom, and how a lot of it has to do with the story, the Xenoblade series is almost indisputably the best told, most thought out, most in-depth story there is when it comes to Nintendo franchises. And so we're clear, this extends beyond just the story and lore on a per-game basis, but the lore between games. A lot of the theorizing and the connections that a lot of Zelda fans like to make between games, a lot of that is planned and part of the overall story for the Xenoblade series. So Nintendo fans that have an issue with the Tears of the Kingdom story and want a big fantastical world to explore that has an in-depth story that's from Nintendo, well, we've had it for a while already. It's the Xenoblade Chronicles series, and I think many would enjoy it. Something that a lot of fans may not be aware of, Monolith Soft is one of Nintendo's most important developers. They have several different studios and they're working on multiple projects all the time. They are responsible for these several different Xenoblade Chronicles games, but they're also very important for other Nintendo projects as well. Monolith Soft has co-developed a lot of other big Nintendo games. They've offered a lot of support for other Nintendo studios. So let me just give you a bit of a list here. They helped with Super Smash Bros. Brawl. They helped with The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. They helped with Animal Crossing's New Leaf, Pikmin 3, A Link Between Worlds, Splatoon, Animal Crossing Happy Home Designer, Breath of the Wild, Splatoon 2, Animal Crossing New Horizons, Splatoon 3, and Tears of the Kingdom. So they're not the main developer for any of these projects, but they did assist with them. Monolith Soft is a key part to Nintendo games. And so, what many people may not realize who are big fans of Animal Crossing, Splatoon, or Zelda, they actually might be fans of Monolith Soft as well. Monolith Soft knows how to make quality games. They are a Nintendo studio. They weren't always a Nintendo studio, but they are very much a Nintendo studio now, and they offer their own Nintendo magic. These massive, amazing worlds, with story and characters that draw you in, and with a very well thought out gameplay loop, Monolith Soft offers that not just in their co-development of these other amazing Zelda games, but with their own dedicated projects that are the Xenoblade games. And so, I think a lot of Zelda fans should definitely be more willing to give Xenoblade a try. Now, not every Zelda fan is going to be a fan of Xenoblade. The fact of the matter is, The Legend of Zelda is a 3D action adventure. The Zelda games require a lot of thought when it comes to the puzzles, and everything's very dynamic. The Xenoblade series technically falls under the genre of JRPG, a Japanese role-playing game. And so there are differences there. But also, Zelda has very often been compared to RPGs. Some people choose to define Zelda as an RPG, and that's a whole other debate for another day. But there is some level of overlap here. Now, a common point I've seen people bring up is that the combat in Xenoblade looks to be atrocious or looks too hard to get into and is very different from Zelda, and it is. That is the case. But I think a lot of people don't even really understand what the combat system is. A lot of people look at it as a turn-based combat system, and it's not a turn-based combat system. Xenoblade games actually feel different from a lot of RPGs. They're their own thing. So the way they work, and each game varies quite a bit, but the overall core concept to the combat is you move around in real time, the same way you do in Zelda when you're fighting an enemy, but you're engaged against an enemy or a group of enemies, and you can lock on to different enemies, and you do have an attack that is happening automatically, but you still affect it in some way. If you move away from the enemy, you will stop auto-attacking, or if you get closer, the auto-attack will continue. But you can also dash and move around. But it's not just about the auto-attack. The auto-attack is just that foundational little piece. The biggest point to the combat system is picking your different arts. And when you pick an art, it happens in real time. The moment you pick an art, or rather an attack or a special move, it happens. So really, it's not too different from when you press the sword attack button in The Legend of Zelda. When you press an art, you do something. Now there's a little bit of a cooldown, you have to wait until you can do the next thing. However, eventually you're supposed to get to the point where you're auto-canceling into one attack after another after another. The gameplay keeps going, it's constantly engaging. The point being, it's not just sitting around waiting for things to happen. And for those that do that, I would argue they don't quite understand the combat system. But there is something to be addressed there, because the Xenoblade games are not for everyone. It's not a typical 3D action game. I'm not trying to argue that the 20 million who have bought Tears of the Kingdom should also buy Xenoblade. That's not the point. The point is, though, that maybe a couple extra million of people who have not given Xenoblade a try, that are into RPGs, but also enjoy good story and fantastic worlds to explore with that Nintendo magic, well, there is a series out there that you might fall in love with, and that is Xenoblade. Now, there are different Xenoblade games, and some of them are easier to get into than others. Xenoblade Chronicles 2, maybe my personal favorite of the series, is the hardest to get into because of the combat system. The tutorial system is terrible, and there are people who beat that game who still don't fully understand all the nuances and mechanics of the combat system. There are really amazing things you can do that you may never truly learn how to do in Xenoblade 2. So that's definitely something that I can understand. People might be a little bit confused about that one. But the most recent ones, Xenoblade Chronicles 3, Xenoblade Chronicles Future Redeemed, the DLC, which is an expansion to Xenoblade Chronicles 3, and also Tomorrow the Golden Country, an expansion to Xenoblade 2, have much more inviting combat systems that you can get into, and especially with 3, the tutorial system does a much better job of telling you how to understand and play the game. And once you get it going, it's extremely satisfying, the combos you can do and the massive chain attacks you can put together with your allies. It's one of my favorite things about the Xenoblade games. To me, it's kind of like poetry in motion once you get it going, but you do need to take some time to get it going, and so it is different. It is not like Zelda. It's a very different style of game. But as I said earlier, I think there are some out there that would definitely be willing to give it a try. Now, something else I'll kind of bring up that's interesting is that we have seen that Monolith Soft has been hiring for a new IP for a very long time, a 3D action game. This goes back to 2017, and we have these really cool pieces of concept art that are separate from their Zelda hiring page, and here we see these two different pieces of art, as I've shown in the past. If you look carefully, they look very Zelda-like. One literally looks like a Zelda warrior princess, and another, there's literally Zelda's symbols in it. And so it may be the case that Monolith Soft may be working on something that has a bit of a Zelda feel. Of course, that is just concept art from a long time ago. However, recently we've seen that they are still hiring for a 3D action experience. And so it may be the case that this new IP could be something that's in the works for Nintendo Switch 2, and considering what Monolith Soft is capable of, this might appeal to a larger part to the Zelda fanbase. It might not be so much a JRPG, but more of a 3D action adventure, which is literally the same genre as the big 3D Zelda games. So the overall point to this video, Zelda fans, pay attention to Monolith Soft, maybe give Xenoblade a try if you think you might be able to get into an RPG, and keep your eyes peeled because there might be something else coming down the road from Monolith Soft that you might find very enjoyable. But what do you all make of this matter? Let me know in the comments below. This is Andres Restart, thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.